On the afternoon of May 20th, 1967, a man stumbled out of the trees at Falcon Lake in Manitoba, Canada. He appeared drunk as he staggered along the road, eventually making his way to the Falcon Motor Hotel. And here, he was spotted by RCMP Constable Gio Salaki, who approached and asked him if he needed help. The man kind of just shrugged him off and said he was going to his room. He then walked to the reception desk where he told the manager that he actually needed a doctor. But he was informed that the local MD was not in town that day, so he just proceeded to go to his room. And from there, he made a call to his wife, telling her that he'd been involved in some sort of accident, but that he was okay and would be riding the Greyhound back to Winnipeg that afternoon. And he was met at the bus station by his son, who took him directly to the Mariscordia Healthcare Center. Here, medics took one look at his condition, and then they rushed him immediately into the emergency room. The man at the center of this odd incident was named Stefan Michalik, and he was 51 years old, and he was an industrial mechanic by trade. Now, Michalik's passion, though, was geology. He'd often spend his weekends at Falcon Lake, prospecting for quartz and silver that was plentiful in the area. And he'd staked a claim in the Falcon Lake area to prospect for precious metals. But this time, his prospecting efforts have gotten him into trouble, in a way. The doctor who examined him found severe burns on his chest and his stomach, presenting in a grid-like pattern. And Michalik was complaining of nausea and dizziness, and he was also hallucinating. And according to the story that he told hospital staff, he had occurred his injuries in an encounter with a UFO. The story Stefan Michalik told went something like this. He'd been out in the woods near Falcon Lake, chipping away at a quartz vein, wearing the welding goggles that he used to protect against flying rock chips. And at that moment, a noise from the lake startled him. And what it was is it was a bunch of geese honking loudly and then taking to the air, clearly disturbed by something. So Michalik went to check on the cause of this commotion, and that was when he spotted them. Not one, but two cigarette or cigar-shaped objects in the sky, giving off this intense scarlet glow. And the objects started descending towards the ground, keeping a consistent distance between them. Their movements were synchronized. One of them stopped and hovered, while the other one continued to descend. And it landed on a flat outcropping of rock, less than 100 yards from where Michalik was standing. And Michalik was so focused on this craft that he did not see its companion leave. But then when he diverted his gaze back into the sky, he realized that the other one was gone. And Stefan was a pragmatic guy, whereas someone more fanciful might have viewed this strange scene and immediately assumed alien craft. His initial impression was that this was some experimental airplane, probably under development by the United States. And he had assumed that it had landed due to mechanical failure, and that being the case, he thought he might be able to go over and help. So he started walking towards the craft, noticing as he did that it was not a cylinder as he first thought, but it was a disc, a classic flying saucer. And this exterior of it was some smooth metal devoid of any visible joints. Where previously it had glowed red, it faded now to a stainless steel sheen. And Michalik noticed something else. There was a diamond-shaped opening about 2 feet by 3 feet standing open on the side of the craft. And he was thinking that this must be a hatch for entering and exiting the vehicle. Michalik got closer now. He could feel the warm air wafting out of the craft. He could smell the tart whiff of sulfur. Somewhere a motor whirled, but it was low and the buzz was like electrical in character. And Michalik kind of scanned and looked at the hull for identifying decals. I mean, he was expecting to see the insignia of NASA or perhaps maybe the United States Air Force, but there was none. Mikhailik was 70 feet away, now 60 feet, and the craft sat shrouded in this bright purple light now. He got these little spots in his eyes just looking at it, and now he heard something. Voices. To Mikhailik's ears, the voices sounded human, one with a higher pitch than the other. However, he could not make out what they were saying, so he went closer. At this point, he's about 10 feet away when he called out, "Hey, you Yankee boys, you having trouble? Come on out and let's see what we can do about it." No reply came from within. He then repeated the question in his native Polish language, then in Russian, then in German. Nothing responded. And he was close now, close enough to peer into the opening hatch. The interior was awash with light, laser-like beams crisscrossing the cabin. Other lights were flashing in seemingly random sequences. What he didn't see, though, was any sign of life at all. What was this thing? This extraordinary craft that seemed technologically way more advanced than anything Mikhailik was aware of or had ever seen. He reached out to touch it and immediately withdrew his hand. The surface was so hot that the tips of his gloves melted. Then, without warning, something must have triggered the craft when he touched it, because the craft turned counterclockwise, revealing a panel with a grid pattern of circular holes. This emitted a blast of heated gas that seared his chest, throwing him backward. And Mikhailik felt this scorching pain, and his shirt was on fire, so he tore it off. And ripping it off, he also removed his undershirt. The craft was rising now. Already, it was at the level of the treetops. Then, in a flash, it was gone, just like its sister ship. And Mikhailik lay on the ground, enveloped by nausea, his head throbbing, pain assailing the seared flesh of his chest. So he pulled himself to his knees, then got to his feet and stood for a moment, bent over, dry heaving just before ejecting his breakfast right into the dirt. And he felt weak, unsteady, and barely able to walk on his feet. So he went to go retrieve his jacket, and he pulled it over his naked torso. Then he staggered off into the direction of town. There were many times during that arduous walk that Mikhailik thought he might not make it. He might die. And dots danced before his vision, and the feeling of nausea never left him. The mother of all headaches just pounded in his skull, and several times he had to stop and throw up. It was just by sheer force of will that got him to the motel, onto the Greyhound, and then to Winnipeg. Now, here he lay in the hospital bed, telling his story to a doctor who probably thought he'd lost his marbles somewhere out in the woods. But Mikhailik did not remain long in the hospital. He was discharged within 24 hours. Then the following day, he made the fateful decision to tell his story to the Winnipeg Tribune, where it appeared under the headline, "I was burned by a UFO." And the accompanying photograph showed Mikhailik with his pajama top unbuttoned and the grid pattern of burns visible across his abdomen. That picture and the article that accompanied it would unleash a firestorm. Suddenly, everybody wanted a piece of Mikhailik. He was inundated with requests for interviews. Reporters were crowded outside his door. He received harassing phone calls from members of the public. His 9-year-old son was even bullied at school. And all the while, Mikhailik was struggling with his health. He suffered bouts of stomach pain, these severe headaches, and occasional blackouts. His weight plummeted, dropping by almost 15 pounds. Eventually, he admitted himself to the Mayo Clinic, where tests revealed that his lymphocyte count was dangerously low. This was believed to have been caused by radiation poisoning, although later tests were negative. And of course, there was interest from the authorities. Mikhailik was interviewed by the RCMP, officials at the Royal Canadian Air Force, and representatives of other government agencies. And the conclusion of these bodies was that he was either mistaken or that he had made the whole thing up. One rather patronizing suggestion was that Michalik had fallen and burned himself on a barbecue grill while drunk, and that he'd made up this whole UFO story to hide his embarrassment. And while the official line was that Michalik was lying, the response by the authorities did not suggest that they disbelieved him. Men and resources poured into this area to search for evidence. These included representatives of the RCMP, the Department of Health, the Department of National Defense, and the Royal Canadian Air Force. Not to mention, there was an American contingent too, with teams from the Aerial Phenomenon Research Organization and the United States Air Force. Michalik was asked to help in the initial search effort, but was unable to do so because of his health. And residents of Falcon Lake remember the frantic days of the search as well. The roar of helicopters seemed like a constant din overhead as Army and Air Force choppers just scoured the lake shore from the sky. Meanwhile, soldiers and police officers walked grid searches through the woods hunting for evidence of this UFO. Then, on the second day of the search, 2 RCMP officers knocked on the door to Michalik's residence and asked Stefan to accompany them back to the lake. And Stefan was still weak from all this ordeal, confined to bed by his doctor, but nonetheless, he actually agreed to go. So he was taken up in this Army helicopter, but the view from the air kind of disoriented him, and he was unable to point out the UFO landing site. And then he didn't do much better on the ground either. But that evening there was a meeting at the Falcon Motor Hotel attended by what one employee called a bunch of official-looking folks. And he asked one of the men where they were from, and the man said that he was from NASA. The following day, the sky was filled with helicopters again, and this was the day that their efforts would be rewarded. The supposed landing site, the spot where Michalik claimed the UFO came to Earth, was marked by his burned glove, by the scorched shirt and the undershirt that he discarded there. But these were not the only clues the searchers found. And this spot was a perfect circle, 15 feet in diameter, in which all of the vegetation was scorched. Geiger meters indicated a high level of radioactivity within that circle. And then there was the metal, apparently superheated to a plasma to then seep down into the cracks of the rocks and solidified there. What could have caused this extreme heat, this radioactivity in this perfect circle of burned vegetation? If you believe Michalik, then it was some strange craft that came down to Earth on that very spot. The Falcon Lake incident has been cited as Canada's best documented UFO case and the world's most documented sighting of a UFO. But now, at that very moment, Mystery Files visited Falcon Lake, and he spoke to officials and said, guys, come on, now, radioactivity, the perfect circle, burned vegetation, why can't y'all just admit this was a UFO? And that's when I said, you know, I'm gonna do a story on this like 55 years later, and do you guys want to be remembered as liars or the truth tellers that for once told the truth? They said, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. There's nothing here to see. And I said, okay, 55 years from now, if you're still alive, check out Mystery Files channel on YouTube and make sure to subscribe and hit that like button while I expose your lies. They scratched their heads as I disintegrated back to my time. I mean, this incident, it is certainly one of the most difficult to debunk. Yet, as with any UFO incident, there are debunkers aplenty. Most lean into the idea that Michalik was drunk and either hallucinated or just made up the whole incident. Some have suggested that he invented the story to keep competitors away from his prospecting site. Yeah, if that was the case, he failed dismally because sightseers flocked into that area to see the spot where the UFO had landed. Another theory addressed the burns on Michalik's body, and it suggested that these were not burns at all, but it was an allergic reaction to something he came into contact with, maybe poison oak. To me, that just sounds ridiculous. I mean, you can decide for yourself if any of these explanations suffice. The truth is that Stefan Michalik never claimed that he encountered a UFO in the woods on that day. And until his dying day in 1999 at the age of 83, he always maintained that it was an experimental military aircraft, probably American, possibly Soviet. And as for the official version, it still insists that this was a hoax perpetrated by Michalik for some unknown purpose. Even the greatest UFO skeptic will find that difficult to swallow. And to quote Stefan's son, Stan, "If Dad hoaxed this, remember, we're talking about a blue-collar industrial mechanic. If he hoaxed this, then he was a freaking genius." And I agree with the son. I mean, what did he receive out of this? If it was some elaborate hoax, bad health? Something isn't adding up. But like always, I'll leave it up to you, the viewers, to decide if Stefan was telling the truth. Let me know your thoughts right now in the comments. Let's get this up to at least 55 likes, maybe 60 if you're feeling frisky. Seriously though, I hope you guys are enjoying Hellmonth so far, but that's all I have for you today. I'll see you on Friday. Cheers. Captain Eugene Tollefson and First Officer John Waller were no strangers to the unexpected. And as experienced pilots, they had faced their fair share of challenges, especially in the air. However, nothing could have prepared them for the events that would be unfolding on the evening of May 25th, 1995. And this would happen as they piloted American West Flight And this would happen as they piloted America West Flight 564 from Chicago to Las Vegas. And the journey, a little rocky though, began like any other, with the crew performing their routine checks and the passengers, getting nice and comfy, settling in for their flight. But little did they know that they were about to become part of this extraordinary encounter that would challenge their understanding of the world and leave them questioning the very nature of reality. Okay, so as the plane is climbing to cruising altitude, Tollefson and Waller had no idea that they were about to embark on a journey that would test their skills as aviators and their belief in the impossible. And the first sign of something being a little off was when a flight attendant burst into the cockpit and her face was just etched with this concern on it. She reported that she saw, along with several other passengers, that they've been noticing these strange lights in the sky moving in ways that defied explanation and logic. So Tollefson and Waller, kind of intrigued by this report, peered out of the cockpit window, expecting to see nothing more than just a few usual stars and the city lights that were below. Instead, they were greeted by a sight that sent shivers down their spine. Off to the right, where they looked at the 3 o'clock position, was a series of bright, strobing lights moving in a counterclockwise direction. And the length of this object was unlike anything they had ever seen before. They said it was stretching out across the horizon in an impossible display of size and power. So Tollefson and Waller, both experienced pilots, were strictly at a loss for words. I mean, they had never encountered anything like this before, and they knew that they needed to report the sighting to air traffic control immediately. So Waller quickly grabbed the radio and he called in, describing these strange lights and asking if anyone had any information at all what might be going on. And to their surprise, air traffic control had no idea what the pilots were even talking about. I mean, they checked in with the nearby Cannon Air Force Base, and they reported that no weather balloons or any other objects were in that area at all. And now the mystery deepens as the controllers confirmed that there were no radar detection of any object in that area, despite its massive size and close proximity to the plane. And as the minutes just kept ticking by, these lights continued to just dance and bobble in the sky, moving in ways that defied the laws of physics. And it was at this point that the passengers began to murmur and point at it, and their excitement was slowly turning into fear as they realized that something truly extraordinary was happening. So Tollefson and Waller, their hearts now pounding in their chests, knew that they had to take action. They couldn't risk the safety of their passengers, but they also just couldn't ignore the incredible sight before them. So, like any good inspector would do, they tried to get a closer look, carefully maneuvering the airplane to get a better view of the object. And right as they approached, the lights seemed to grow brighter and more intense. They were pulsating with this energy that was almost palpable, and the passengers, now fully aware of the situation, begin to panic, and their screams and cries start filling the cabin. And with Tollefson and Waller, with their training kicking in, they did their best to calm down the passengers, even as they themselves were gripped by a sense of dread and terror. I mean, they had no idea what they were dealing with, but they knew that they had to remain focused and in control. And then suddenly, without warning, the lights began to move towards the plane at this incredible speed. Tollefson and Waller at this point, their eyes wide with disbelief, just watched as the object was getting closer and closer. And believe it or not, it closed the distance between them in a matter of seconds. And the passengers that were now in a state of full-blown panic began to scream and cry, and some of them even fainting from the sheer terror of the moment. So Tollefson and Waller, their hands gripping on the controls as tight as they could, knew that they had to act fast. So with a quick glance at each other, they both knew what they were thinking at that moment, and they made the decision to take evasive actions. Waller, his voice was just shaking with adrenaline, called out to Tollefson, "We have to get out of here, now!" And Tollefson nodded, his jaw set with determination, and he quickly pushed the throttle forward, urging the plane to accelerate away from the object. But here's the thing. No matter how fast they flew, the lights seemed to keep pace and be right beside them, matching their every move with this precision that was almost supernatural. And at this point, the passengers, their faces were pressed against the windows, watching in horror as the lights just kept dancing around the plane, coming so close that they could almost reach out and touch it. Tollefson and Waller at the moment, their minds racing with these possibilities, knew that they had to do something drastic, because they couldn't outrun the object, and they couldn't risk the safety of any of the passengers on board. So in a moment of pure instinct, Tollefson made the decision to try and communicate with the object. So he grabbed the radio and he began to speak, his voice steady and calm despite the chaos that was around him. "This is American West Flight 864. We are being pursued by an unidentified object. We request immediate assistance. Over." And then there was a moment of silence, broken only by the sound of the engines and the muffled cries of the passengers. Then, to everybody's amazement, the lights began to change color on the craft, shifting from a blinding white to a deep, pulsating red. Tollefson and Waller at this point just kind of watched in awe as the object began to move actually away from the plane. Then, like straight out of a movie like Star Wars, it went light speed and zipped into outer space in a jaw-dropping moment. And yes, this is a real story. They couldn't believe what had just happened, but they knew that they had just witnessed something truly extraordinary. Also, guys, I forgot to mention this at the beginning. Make sure to find the hidden clue in this video to be entered into the giveaway. I usually make it a like button, so maybe that'll help. Okay, so as the object now finally disappeared from view, Tollefson and Waller were left with a sense of both relief and amazement. I mean, they had just experienced something that most people like me could only dream of, and they knew that their lives would never be the same ever again. And the passengers at this point, still shaken by the encounter, began to chatter kind of excitedly, their fear kind of giving away to this sense of wonder and disbelief now that the immediate threat was gone. I mean, come on. They had just been part of something truly incredible, and they knew that they would be telling the story to their kids and their grandkids for the rest of their lives. Tollefson and Waller at this point, their adrenaline still pumping, knew that they had to report this incident quickly to the authorities. So ASAP, they contacted air traffic control and relayed the details of this encounter. And their voices, you could tell, were still shaking with excitement or fear, or both. And in the days and even weeks that followed, the story of American West Flight 564 became a sensation, capturing the imagination of people all over the world. And Tollefson and Waller found themselves in the exact center of this media storm. Their names and faces were posted across headlines and television screens. But despite the attention and scrutiny, the pilots remained steadfast in their account of the events, never once wavering in the conviction of what they had seen that night. They knew that they had truly been a part of something that was extraordinary, and they were determined to share their true story with the world. Years later, the encounter of America's West Flight 564 remains one of the most compelling and well-documented cases of a UFO sighting in history. And despite the best efforts of skeptics and debunkers, the testimony of Captain Eugene Tollefson, First Officer John Waller, and the passengers on board that flight continues to stand as a testament to the incredible events of that night. And for Tollefson and Waller, this experience was actually a turning point in their lives, one that forever changed the way that they looked at the world. Like I said, they had seen something that most people could only dream of, and they had come out of it on the other side with a newfound sense of wonder and possibility. But now, as we move 27 years in the future, which would be 2 years ago in 2022, astronomers for some reason re-examined the American West Flight 564 incident. Supposedly, saying that they could solve it now because of how advanced their new technology has become. And after consideration of the available evidence, they reached a surprising conclusion. The mysterious lights and the objects that were witnessed by the pilot, the co-pilot, the staff, the flight attendants, and all the people, guess what? It was not of extraterrestrial origin. Nope, but rather a rare and fascinating display of celestial bodies, such as bright planets, stars, or even a meteor shower. Now, it's up to you to determine if you actually buy this explanation, but anytime a government entity says, 10, 20, or 30 years later, something different happened, like in the case of Dyatlov Pass, for example, red lights start flashing in my head, and all I can think is, this is how they decided to cover this up. In the end, the legacy of the American West Flight 564 is one of a mystery and wonder. A reminder that there is still so much that we have yet to understand about the universe that we live in. And this is a story that continues to captivate and to inspire, inviting us to keep our minds open and our eyes turned maybe not towards the ground where we're walking or the phone that we're watching, but to the skies where we once used to look all the time. And for those who were there on that fateful night, the encounter will always be a defining moment in their lives. In the end, it is through their experiences that we find the inspiration to keep searching, keep dreaming, and keep researching for the truth, no matter where that may lead us. And regardless of what future technology will say, I would like to think that the pilots, the co-pilots, the flight attendants know the difference between something right in front of them and something that's billions of miles away. But then again, that's for you to determine. Have you ever wondered what lies beyond the veil of our reality? What horrors lurk in the shadows, waiting to prey upon the unsuspecting? Well, for Ariana, a young woman with a fascination for the paranormal, these questions would be answered in the most terrifying way imaginable. Because in the heart of Kansas, a cemetery known as one of the 7 gates to hell, well, Ariana would come face to face with the very demons that she had spent her life studying. But little did she know that her curiosity would unleash a nightmare beyond her wildest imaginations. Welcome everybody to the newest and best true crime, mysterious, and paranormal channel, Mystery Files. Now as of now, we're going to slip into a mind that's not our own. Let's go. In the heart of Kansas, there lies a cemetery that is shrouded in darkness and mystery. It's called Stoll Cemetery, and it's located in this small, unincorporated community of Stoll. And it has long been the subject of these spine-chilling legends and tales of the paranormal. There's even whispers of satanic rituals, ghostly apparitions, and even, this part's true, a gateway to hell itself circulated for decades, drawing the morbidly curious and the brave to its eerie ground. Now, Ariana was a young woman with this fascination for the otherworldly, and she had always been drawn for some reason to the unknown. I mean, you could go on her desktop computer, and the first thing that you would find right in the middle of all the folders was a folder named Demons. And it was filled with these screenshots of demons and paranormal activity, a testament to her obsession of the dark side. So when she and her ghost hunting team found themselves in Kansas City, they knew they had to visit the notorious Stoll Cemetery. Like I said, it's one of Earth's 7 gates of hell. And yes, this is literally called a gate to hell. I mean, they did this because the night before, they had explored this haunted castle, but kind of left them, still itching and unsatisfied. The scares were too predictable, and the atmosphere was not nearly as oppressive as they had hoped for. So Ariana was just craving something more. She wanted more. She wanted shivers to be sent down her spine and make her question the very nature of reality to begin with. So as they drove through the pitch black darkness, the anticipation grew with every mile. Ariana had heard the stories before. I mean, this is true, the Pope himself refuses to fly over Stoll Cemetery. Such was the power of the evil that allegedly resided there. So at this point, the car was kind of filled with this, nervous laughter and this nervous energy, and Ariana's heart started to race as they got closer to their destination. But all of a sudden, a sickening feeling just washed over her. It was a sensation unlike anything that she had ever experienced before. It was a suffocating negativity that seemed to permeate in that very air that was around them. And all of a sudden, the car began to reek of sulfur, a scent that Ariana knew all too well from her studies of the paranormal, and it was an unmistakable sign of a demonic presence. And then right then, as if on cue, a fly buzzed around the interior of the car, its erratic movements adding to the unease that had settled over the group. Ariana's mind was racing, recalling the countless accounts that she had read about, which was about demonic activity and the signs that heralded their presence. 2 signs now were enough for Ariana. The overwhelming negativity and the appearance of the fly were more than just coincidences. She knew deep down that they had stumbled upon something very sinister at Stoll Cemetery. She even said, "This is scary, let's leave." And her voice was trembling with a mixture of fear and excitement. But before they went to flee, Ariana felt compelled to just do 2 things. First, she rolled down her window and addressed the unseen entities that lurked out in the darkness. Yes, she actually apologized to them. She said, "We apologize. We did not mean to disrupt your peace." And that's what she said as her words were carried out away by the eerie stillness of night. Then number 2, driven by a force that she couldn't quite explain, Ariana decided to right there take a picture. She kind of held her breath as she snapped the photo, not knowing what horrors might be revealed when she looked at the screen. And this is when it gets truly weird, because the next day, Ariana attempted to send the picture to her manager, eager to, share this chilling encounter with someone else. But no matter how many times she tried, the file refused to send it. She kept going over and over again, and it just wouldn't budge. It would not send. It was as some unseen strange force was preventing the image from leaving her phone. So frustration turned into confusion and then sheer terror, because a message flashed on her screen and the number 666 were glaring back at her. And it said that the file size was 666 megabytes. An ominous sign that sent shivers down her spine. Ariana realized that she had captured something far more sinister than she ever imagined. Because in this picture were faces. And the faces in the picture were distorted and twisted, but they bore this uncanny resemblance to demons that she had studied so intently. But she could never have imagined the horrors that would follow now. You see, Ariana's initial excitement of what she just captured turned to dread as she began to experience a series of terrifying phenomena. These whispers, at first, were faint and distant, but over time they grew louder and more insistent. And there were these images that would flash before her eyes whenever she tried to close them. And it became more vivid and disturbing, filled with these hellish red shapes that seemed to pulsate this malevolent energy. And for her, sleep became a distant memory as this malevolent presence followed her wherever she went. And all the time, the very air just around her felt very thick and oppressive, as if these demons she had unwittingly summoned were closing in, ready to almost claim her soul. So at this point, desperate for answers and relief from the torment, Ariana turned to the internet, hoping to find someone who could help her. She scoured these forums and websites dedicated to the paranormal, seeking guidance from those who had encountered similar things. But as she delved deeper into the dark recesses of the web, she stumbled upon a shocking revelation. You see, the pictures that she had taken that fateful night, with the 3 faces in them at the iconic demonic Skull Cemetery, were almost the exact pictures that she found when she went down this wormhole on the internet. And not only that, these demons almost looked identical to the demons that she had in her file called Demons. Now, she truly doesn't know if the file that said 666 megabytes finally sent to her manager or not. But in hopes of getting rid of all these weird and strange things that were starting to happen to her, she decided at that moment, as cool as it was to have this actual proof, she decided to delete the picture. And she was hoping that by doing this, everything that she was experiencing would just stop. But it didn't work, because 2 weeks later, she said as soon as she closed her eyes, she heard this really loud rumble that was right by her head. And she said whenever she opened her eyes, it would stop immediately. But then when she closed her eyes, it started again with the whispers. And every time that she closed her eyes, she started seeing these really disturbing images with, like I said before, these weird red demonic shapes. And at this very moment, she decided to open her eyes and she got on the phone. And when she got on the phone, all she could say is, "I'm really scared and I don't want to go to bed." The person tried to calm her down, but to really no avail. But she decided in the end to kind of scooch over on her bed to the left side, because she said that's where the best service was in her room. And there was this massive black matter. She had absolutely no idea what it was. She said that it was like something like a black cloud that was right next to her. She started crying. And she was on the phone screaming, "What do I do? What do I do?" And they said, "Tell it to F off." And that's when she said, "I'm not going to do that. It's going to get upset. So I'm just going to chill and not feed into it, because all it wants is my fear. It feeds on fear." She's talking in her head and talking on the phone at this point, trying to convince herself what to do. She actually then watched this black mass move to the front of her bed, and she was so scared that she accidentally actually fell asleep on the phone. And when she woke up, it was gone. But the very next night, her friend Tyler was staying with her. And she said she was trying to sleep and her body felt paralyzed almost. And she described the exact same thing that Ariana saw. And at this point, millions of people are curious about what happened. And if you're asking yourself how millions of people could be asking about what happened, well, this is because Ariana in this story is no ordinary person. You see, she's actually this massive, huge, global superstar with this massive following on social media. Her every move is scrutinized, her every post is dissected by legions of devoted fans. Yes, this Ariana was none other than Ariana Grande. Remember, even the most popular or fortunate among us are not immune from the dark side of this world that we don't really have that many answers to. But for Ariana Grande, this encounter at Stoll Cemetery would forever change her life. A moment of curiosity that had unleashed a nightmare beyond her wildest imagination. It's not known if Ariana to this day is still going through this, because this story is from actually 2013. And for those that dare to follow in her footsteps, venturing into the heart of darkness in search of answers, the warning is clear. Be careful what you wish for, because you just might get it. And like I said, you don't have to take my word on any of this. You can just ask Ariana Grande herself, or read her Cosmopolitan interview from 2013. Now, I had no idea that Ariana Grande was such a huge fan of the paranormal. So Ariana, on the slim chance that you see this, I would love for you to come on the show and you can be the Miss Files to the Mystery Files. What do you say? Annie McCarrick had journeyed to Dublin, Ireland in 1987. She had been connecting with her Irish heritage for the past 5 years. But when she set out on a daytime hike one day, she vanished without a trace, and all attempts to locate her were unsuccessful. And it seems like she was the first woman to go missing in this so-called vanishing triangle, which covers roughly a triangular area of land between the towns of Louth, Wexford, and Offaly. I hope I said those right. But this expanse includes parts of various counties, as well as the country's capital city of Dublin. In March 1993, Annie made a fateful promise to her friends that she would meet them for the next day for dinner. But when they arrived at her apartment, her door was locked and no answer met their desperate knocks. Her parents from Long Island eventually received a late-night call that their daughter had vanished, and they quickly flew to Ireland, unaware of the horrific truth hidden in that region. Young women were being snared in a deadly trap. 6 whole months of searching led to no answers but one clue. A doorman at Johnny Fox's pub revealed that Annie had been there with a man earlier on the day of her disappearance. The police in Ireland are called the Gardaí, and the Gardaí investigated, but any hope of discovering information soon faded away. Then, 4 months after she vanished, another woman disappeared, echoing the same fate as Annie McCarrick's before her. Eva Brennan's fists clenched and her brow furrowed in rage as the argument with her parents escalated. With one final scowl, she stormed out of their home in Terranure, Dublin on July 25th, 1993, a decision that was to haunt her family forever. Not hearing from Eva over the days that followed, a heavy dread descended upon her parents until they found the courage to bravely venture to her apartment. But all that hope just evaporated when they found no trace of her daughter there. And seconds later, they were making a desperate rush to the Gardaí station with their hearts pounding in fear. And every available resource was deployed to search for Eva, but it seemed that the pleas were ignored as hours stretched into days without even the slightest hint of her whereabouts, until the shocking truth emerged that Eva had been labeled a person that was mentally unstable and might have taken her own life. Wherever she was, it seemed like nobody would ever find her alive. Her parents refused to accept this tragic conclusion, however, refusing to give up hope until she is finally brought home. For story number 3, Imelda Keenan's typical afternoon errand to the post office suddenly became anything but ordinary. She strolled towards Lombard Street at 1:30 p.m. on a holiday, knowing full well that the post office was closed. But her destination was never reached. Imelda disappeared also without a trace. Then her brother reported her missing the following day. Yet something strange you could feel was lingering in the air. Her purse remained in the apartment, and Mark Wall, her boyfriend, had failed to call the police when she did not return home. But unconvinced by his apparent indifference, the police quickly cast him aside as they neglected to launch a thorough investigation to find Imelda. Then Jojo Dullard, a 21-year-old from Callan, Kilkenny, had gone to Dublin for beauty therapy classes but dropped out after she decided she wanted to go back home. And on the 9th of November 1995, she missed the last bus to take her there, and now she had to find another way. And instead of, finding a place to stay for the night and then continuing on, JoJo got onto a bus going to Naas, located 65 miles away from her hometown. She then hitchhiked literally until 11:30 p.m. when she reached Moan and called up one of her acquaintances. She told them that she was looking for a ride, and right when she said that, a car had pulled up. When the car pulled up, JoJo says, "It looks like I found a ride, I gotta go." And then following that phone call, JoJo never returned or was heard from again. Then, Fiona Pender vanished without a trace one fateful morning in 1996, just 7 months pregnant, 25 years old, and with her whole future ahead of her. She stepped into the void and never returned. 9 long years passed until a hiker stumbled upon a small wooden cross in the vast Slieve Bloom Mountains bearing Fiona's name, suggesting that she was buried somewhere in the unforgiving wilderness. And despite intense searches, no trace of Fiona has ever been found. Not to mention the tragedy continued. On the evening of February 13th, 1997, 17-year-old Sierra Breen was watching TV with her mother before they both went to bed at around 12:30. An hour and a half later, Sierra's mother decided to take a bathroom break, which led her to find that her daughter was gone from her bedroom. So the police were called in, and it soon became apparent that Sierra had been sneaking out of the house at night and returning before morning. She had done this now numerous times. This time, however, she never made it back home. And during the investigation, Sierra's friends told the authorities about Liam Mullen, someone who lived on their street and seemed obsessively infatuated with Sierra, yet was constantly snubbed by her and her friends. And he was arrested twice in connection with Sierra's disappearance, but was ultimately released due to lack of sufficient evidence. And in 2017, Mullen passed away while he was under arrest for an unrelated crime. By then, 6 women were already reported missing. And I actually did the story of Sierra Breen as one of my first stories that I ever told. And I will put a link to it in the description, or I'll put it up right here or in the cards. And the drama and trauma continue, because on February 8th, 1998, 19-year-old Fiona Sinnott joined the list of 7 people who had now gone missing. She and her partner, Sean Carroll, were at a pub with some buddies that night, then returned to their flat where Fiona went to bed and Sean toppled over on the couch and fell into a slumber. In the following morning, Sean ventured out to collect their 11-month-old daughter from his mom's place while Fiona remained at the apartment. And when he got back home, Fiona was nowhere to be found, just like Imelda Keenan's case. This one left law enforcement officers literally scratching their heads. Not a single item of clothing belonging to Fiona had been left behind in the room. And after police put out an inquiry for information, a farmer told them that he had found a few sacks of clothes on his property. Some of the clothing was tagged with Fiona Sinnott's name, but him at the time, not realizing the significance, he burned the clothing as he did with all the garbage that people would dump on him. So the police decided to actually leave this matter alone. And had they investigated Sean Carroll further, they would have discovered he later served time in jail for threatening to murder his cousin. I know I'm throwing a lot at you right now, guys, but there's a reason for this. The last woman to go missing from the Vanishing Triangle was another teenager, 18-year-old Deirdre Jacob. This is the most perplexing of all the disappearances. Deirdre was a student at St. Mary's University in London. She was home for the holidays at this time, and on July 28th, 1998, she was seen walking along the street towards her parents' house. It was mid-afternoon and there was plenty of traffic out. Both pedestrian and cars were all around. And Deirdre was last spotted waiting to cross the road to her family home. She vanished from a very busy street in broad daylight, and no one saw one thing at all. Deirdre Jacobs' vanishing was the last connected to the Vanishing Triangle, although there were at least 5 more cases in the same period that had a conclusion. The remains of these victims revealed signs of sexual assault, battery, and strangulation. And it's sad to say, but this is likely what happened to the 8 missing women as well. But who is behind these heinous acts? Is it a serial killer? Or are they all unrelated except for their vicinity? The Gardaí do have an opinion on this. They believe one single person is responsible, and they think they know who. In the year 2000, a woman was taken from Carlo Street, driven into the Wicklow Mountains, and experienced horrible sexual assault. The attacker's hands clamped around her throat like a vice, cutting off her air supply. And desperately, she clawed at his arms, mainly trying to break free from this deadly grip. And with each passing second, she was slipping closer and closer to the oblivion, until the fateful twist of fate had intervened. 2 hunters were walking on the mountain trail when they heard the woman's desperate cry for help, and they rushed to her aid. Now, confronted with 2 armed men instead of one helpless woman, the assailant was quickly overpowered by their combined force. And his name was Larry Murphy, and he had a long list of run-ins with the Gardaí. He was eventually convicted of sexual assault and attempted murder, and he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. But the police wondered if this could be the only attack that Murphy was responsible for. He lived close enough to 3 of the missing women within the Vanishing Triangle: Deirdre Jacob, Jojo Dullard, and Annie McCarrick. So could he really be the one behind this? Murphy himself was a craftsman who had done work for Deirdre's grandmother. Could that be how he managed to kidnap her from a crowded street? Possibly. He knew her and possibly could have talked her into getting into his vehicle. And it is a plausible idea, but unfortunately, there is no proof for it. Larry Murphy denies any links to the vanished people. The mystery of the Vanishing Triangle to this day remains unsolved. So if you ever find yourself in this spot in Ireland called the Vanishing Triangle, be sure to at least grab a buddy or be with several different people, women, ladies, whatever. If you are alone, do not go walking around these parts, because we've seen time and time again that you'll go in, but you might not come out. On May 14, 2008, Brandon Swanson set out to celebrate the end of that year's classes with his friends, and he attended a couple of local gatherings that evening, first in Lind, which is near his home in Marshall, then in Canby, which is roughly about 30 miles away from his house. Now, Swanson's friends would later report that while they saw Swanson drinking, he didn't seem drunk. Okay, so you guys really got to listen to this one. Swanson left Canby sometime after midnight to drive home, a trip he made practically every day as part of his commute to and from school. But that night, instead of taking Minnesota State Highway 68, which is the most direct route between Canby and Marshall, Swanson chose to drive through rural farming roads. Now, perhaps this was to sightsee in the middle of the night, or perhaps it was to avoid police because he drank a little bit. But whatever his reason may be, he soon got into trouble. Swanson veered into a ditch near a farming field, and because his car's wheels were now elevated, he couldn't get any traction at all to drive away or back out. And around 1:54 a.m., Swanson called his parents asking for a ride home, and he told them he was near Lind, about 10 minutes away from their home in Marshall. So Swanson's parents said yes, and they headed out to pick him up. Now, staying connected to the call as they drove, they found nothing but pitch darkness. So tempers kind of flared in the early hours as these frustrations grew. "Wait a minute, don't you see me?" Swanson asked as both he and his parents flashed their car headlights to signify their presence. And at one point, Swanson just hung up, And then his mother called him back apologizing, and Swanson told his parents he would just walk back toward his friend's house in Lind. And so Swanson's father dropped his wife off back at home and continued towards Lind, remaining on the phone with his son. I mean, isn't this already getting weird enough? He says he's one place 10 minutes down the road. He waits till they get there on the phone with them. They're flickering their lights saying, "Hey, we're here." And he's not there. But then, continuing, as he walked in the darkness, Swanson suggested that his parents meet him in the parking lot of a popular nightclub in Lynn, and decided to cut across a field as a shortcut. Now, continuing on, he claimed to his dad to see these lights of something nearby, and then abruptly shouted out, "Oh shit," to his dad while still on the phone, and then the call ended. Now, to this day, no one knows what happened to him. No body found. None of his belongings found. Nothing. But who knows? Perhaps, a farmer shot him because he was on their land and they shot first and asked questions later. Or perhaps it was so dark that he accidentally stepped in a river and accidentally drowned. Or there's the theory that might make the most sense, to me at least, and that was that he was abducted, and possibly by aliens. Now, I know that may be far-fetched, but it could happen. It would explain the lights right before he lost connection, and then his body was never seen again. So I don't know. But you tell me what you think right now in the comments.